Everyone's attention to there's a famous picture in New Vrindaban of four of the founding fathers of New Vrindaban, Kirnanda Swami, Hayagriva, Prajumna, and another devotee, Vamanadev. And I didn't realize that devotee in that picture was here all weekend, so I'd like him to wave to you all. This devotee is in that famous picture, and I thought it was great that someone from that picture was here with us this weekend, so thank you, Vamanadev.
Hare Krishna.
And on the order of my professor of religion, I went up to Montreal, and there I met devotees for the first time. And I went shortly thereafter, within a few months, I left the university and went to New York, 26 Second Avenue, and served with Brahmananda. I was probably, I like to brag about it as being one of the first temple commanders, but I don't know of any others. They're here, and they have to speak up. I'm going to claim that title. And under Brahmananda, I mentioned Brahmananda because he cautioned me when I was approached by Kirtananda Maharaj and Hayagriva. They had come to New York, and they were looking for devotees. There was only a few of them. I think Rishikesh was a student, but he was with them, and there was Hayagriva Kirtan. And they had this project in West Virginia. They had this lease on some land, and it was they had just come in contact with it, and they needed some help because the fall was coming, winter was coming. It was in the fall of '68, and we had to put a roof on the house and put some siding up. And so I had been doing a lot of kind of building and handyman work at the temple. Wasn't my real training. It was something I had done my whole life as a child. I was a young man. I was always building things. And then when I got to the university, I majored at the time that I met devotees. I was majoring in philosophy. So I really wasn't a builder per se. But I think I was handy. So they talked me into going, and Brahmananda said, "Be careful, it's a lot different than New York, and it's pretty raw." I don't think anybody had actually been out there, but they had seen some pictures. And there were some questions, so he just told me to be on. He was my big brother. He was really looking out for me. So anyway, I went out there in this, it seemed like it was a living room on wheels, some old big car. There was four of us in it. We went out to, it seemed like it took forever to get here, going all these back roads, and we ended up at the base. There was a schoolhouse, as I recall, in the base, and then we had this long driveway. It had been raining, so we decided to walk up. And it was quite a long walk, as I recall. And I'll tell you the story later on in this little talk about that driveway. But when I got up there, I saw it was just a small house, a small building. Most of you have seen it. Most of you are familiar with it. It was the only building. There was a small shack or some little buildings out back. I think that's where they were staying. I was staying in that house. I was fairly first initiated. I'd been in the movement a few months, maybe 6 months. I had my first initiation. And there I was. I had to figure this out. I had no car, of course, or anything. And I was staying there. There was no water, no electricity. So I got a fire going. They had some sort of a fire thing, so we had tried to get a little bit of heat going, but that was a chore. And then when I asked about the water, that was way down this hill, and there was a little waterfall, and that was the shower, or the source of water. So that was new to me. Little background, I didn't come from the hills of West Virginia, from Western Mass, and I went to, my father was a doctor, I went through prep schools and stuff. So this is a little rough. It was out of my comfort zone. But nonetheless, I learned how to walk down that hill to get the water and to take a shower. It wasn't with all those, they cut in those steps and stuff, I think within a year or two. But when I was there, it was you had to be a goat to get down. And it was especially rough if it got dark. And in the fall, of course, it gets dark early. So you've been working all day, it got dark, so how are you going to get clean? You're going down this. It was challenging. So I wasn't actually there too long, maybe a few months. And during that time, I got that work done. And a few things that were going on at the time. We went to a few auctions. I went with Kirtananda and the student. He wasn't on his Rishikesh to me at that time. He was a student. He was on the Hargreaves student. So anyway, we went there, and I thought it quite odd. Here we are in this rather backwoods place, and we're looking at all these building materials that were up for auction, and he's talking about all these grand buildings and all this development and things, and we could barely come up with the money to put roll roofing on the roof. So it seemed like a bit of a disconnect to me, but there were plans even back then to make this into what it is today. So that was the first time I visited New Vrindavan, and the first time I stayed there. And I went back after several months, and came back again from the fall of '68 until Janmashtami of '69 or '70. 2 years later, I came. It's now the infamous Janmashtami of 1970, and I was here for that. So I'll give you a little information about that. There were a lot of devotees here, and by that time, this was fast forward 2 years, I had gotten married, and I had a child, and I was a temple president in St. Louis. And we got the whole temple, it was all 10, 12 of us, together, and came up to New Vrindavan. Everyone had to come for the Janmashtami. I mean, we didn't leave anybody behind. And some of them were just barely coming into the temple. They were all new devotees. So it was a baptism by fire for most of them, because it was a really unusual Janmashtami celebration. Many of you know the background of that celebration, about the fact that there was there was a period when they were discussing philosophical points. Let me put it that way. And one of the philosophical points was a little bit off the mark, and it made quite an impression on the devotees. And right after they came out, they had come to the conclusion that Prabhupada was God, which was refuted, obviously, by Prabhupada, and he said it straight. But right after that, everyone was completely confused. So then it started raining so hard. The rain, we were all up on the hill, and most of us were living in tents, because there was only a few buildings, even at that time. So we all had tents. And I had a tent, a very small tent. It was a 4-person or 2-person tent. And the water was coming right through it. And this was 9 o'clock, 10 o'clock at night. So I had to do something. I couldn't stay there. I had an infant, 2-month-old, 4-month-old, or 3-month-old infant. And my wife and myself. So I think we abandoned the tent, but we just grabbed everything, and we had a van, or a station wagon down by the schoolhouse, because you couldn't drive up the road. And walking down that road at 10 o'clock at night, in a storm that was to beat the van, there were several people trying to do it. Nobody within my eyesight, because you couldn't see 10 feet ahead of you. By the time I got down to the bottom, obviously we're soaking wet, and it was all we could do to stay on the road, to see the road. Just to tell you, it wasn't always as nice as it looks now. And it's kind of, my son, when I finally got the door open, I found out somehow or other during the walk down the trail, slipping and everything, he had become inverted. I was holding on to what I thought was his head, it was his ankles. And so he wasn't looking too good. So I smacked him, and he started screaming. I said, "That's a good sign." I said, "Here you go. here you go, Indira, take this, because he needs something, you know. So that was really, very scary. It could have ended badly, but it ended all right. So we got dried and started up the car and warmed up. So that was that incident. As far as any other times, I came to several other festivals, but I never lived or spent any more time here. I knew Brahmananda very well, and of course I knew. Let me see who else. Well, there's several devotees here that I know, Jadonanda and many of them. So, if there's any questions or anything, that's all I have to say right now. Yeah, Hare Krishna. Thank you.